I see your head nodding.
Yeah, that the supplement not supplant doesn't apply to the ESSER funds. So you aren't as bound by some of the rigidity of accounting. They do have their own accounting requirements, obviously, but you have the most flexibility with those funds.
And then the other, and I'm going to defer to Liz probably more often than she's comfortable, but so when we found out that those ESSER funds have more flexibility because we started looking, because you guys activated those questions, then we also discovered that with Medicaid dollars, it's called C4S in Michigan, we were able to look at the fact that because staff are pooled, there's an allowability to coordinate services if you're using those Medicaid dollars for the general education population. Liz, is there anything about what I just said that's inconsistent with what you've heard as well?
No, I just can't speak to that quite as clearly. You know,
so we're learning.
We're learning because, I mean, this question around, obviously, you know, when it's coordination of care for the individual that's receiving the service, we know that's very much allowable. We're kind of massaging to understand how the broader coordination of the system can be funded in connection to these different funds. So,
and so within the model demonstration for ISF, we've made sure that Tammy, who's leading the model demonstration for the 2 districts, has every documented fiscal piece of information that we can get our hands on. So in Google Drive, we made sure that we got kind of, some of the hard work is just finding out what the acronyms are. But when Mark started talking about flexibility and state policy, and Kelly, I know you know what I'm talking about, because Pennsylvania is always lifted up as an example, then it's been our task between now and say Thanksgiving to determine how we might help in real time districts make decisions to support their infrastructure. And so I asked the 31 practice group that typically doesn't meet regularly, if we could meet regularly through the summer to support districts in real time to be able to leverage their funds in a more coordinated way. Liz was on that call and Steve was on that call. So I see a smile in Susan, but it's making me feel like there's pressure because it's just a baby step. But I'm just connecting the dots that those baby steps wouldn't have even happened if you hadn't started with last month's webinar.
No, I think that's fair. I mean, you know, we are all in this new money space right now, and I love the way that you guys are being really thoughtful about ways to say, well, if this pot of funding can't support the flexibility of clinicians to be positioned on teams and do that systemic coordination of care, where do we have the flexibility, and how do we leverage that and pool funding together, and then be really clear, translate what you're learning about at the state level to the demonstration sites and to other sites who are trying to figure this out together, and that direct line of communication. So those are kind of the structures and systems I was really excited to learn, because you're right, in most situations we are in that, we're just stuck in that fee for service model. And how do we you know, break out of that mold and really invest in having the clinicians really be part of the fabric of the school community and remove that funding barrier that seems to exist everywhere in the country.
The only thing I'd add too is that because we pulled in the fiscal guidance, maybe because of the dance step of what Liz and Steve have been doing for the last year, maybe it made the food touch a little bit more, is then when Tammy reported that when she was talking to the 2 districts, there were fiscal terms and vocabulary that the districts were asking about that gave Tammy and Sheila an ability to be more oriented, right? So educators don't always think about the fiscal side of things, and it's really critical that we do that. And so we have to have some capacity that we build to make sure that in real time, as people are bringing up acronyms about a mental health virtual platform, the folks doing the work of MTSS and PBIS and mental health, they're enabled to be able to say, I'm learning about that, and at least connect on that conversation.
Yeah, the work you guys have done has definitely helped us to be able to have those conversations with the district, because at least we know a little bit what they're talking about, and now we know where to go to get them more information. So I think it's been really instrumental in moving the work forward, or starting to move the work forward.
Thank you so much. Thanks for offering that. Anybody have any questions? Anybody in kind of a similar process as they are learning about allowable costs for this new amount of money coming at us from the CARES Act and from the ESSERs? Okay. I think on the state leaders call, we were having this conversation earlier about how important it is to invest in ourselves. You know, the short-term funding, and to the extent possible, have folks really understand that the infrastructure that's been established in many states and districts with MTSS, how do we stay on that pathway and help situate ourselves in the return to school plan, rather than having the funding fragment us further, and which is a concern, because I'm seeing in a couple of states that I'm working in, there's this return to school plan, and people are thinking they need a return to school team and a return to school, you know, and it's situating outside of any kind of MTSS work, rather than being brought into that single system of support. So really trying to get in front of it to the extent possible, and not having the funding lead to more fragmentation.
This is somewhat related, but this is kind of more to your earlier question, but when you were talking about funding, I was thinking, yeah, if we had a state team, this would be where this conversation would take place. But so not really something to celebrate totally, but I guess to celebrate that we're in the muddy process of trying to figure out our state team. And so I feel like just the fact that we dove in and we're totally drenched, but we're doing it, is my celebration, because it's definitely surfaced a lot of issues of coordination at the state level. And I know we've talked about this before, but it just really shows to me the critical importance of figuring this out, and how incredibly unfair it is to think that the districts, you know, that we're asking the districts to do this, and now they're getting all of this money and having all of these confusing conversations and teams, and we can't totally get our act together at the state level. And I know that you guys are taking that in the spirit of, I'm not bashing Delaware in any way, I'm just saying that it's really difficult work, but like we have a moral imperative to do it. So I'm excited that our state is really deeply engaged in it right now. But just saying I can see that it's going to be a process, but I'm happy that we've been dancing around the conversation for so long. This is really the first time. And thanks to Brandy and Kim, kind of pushed us into the water, and it's happening. It's going to happen. I have faith.
The conversations about alignment at the state level are very difficult because of the fragmentation among departments, et cetera, et cetera. So Kelly and I are working with the state of Wisconsin, and they've had a state leadership team for a long time, but they really pushed the conversation with the state leadership team. And what they learned is the districts are taking on the alignment issues themselves. Mm-hmm. Right. And actually, one of them in particular had almost replicated a tool we have, an initiative inventory, because the state, they didn't know about it because they weren't getting that through the state level. And I think it opened a lot of people's eyes by having that district voice on the state team. So think about that. It was really, Kelly, you might have something else to say about that.
Well, I will say, as I typed in chat, Debbie, it's probably no comfort, and you're not alone, right? Like lots of, as Lucy was saying, many states are having these same conversations of, oh, we're asking schools to do a lot, or we're asking districts to do a lot, or, you know, even what Christy shared about the celebration of things being legislated. The tricky part is what sometimes happens then is everyone hops to it, and 1, 2, 3, we've got separate teams for everything that's been required or mandated, right? Including the whatever your state is calling their plan for return to school, right? And so those who are like yourselves, kind of in the know around alignment and thinking about everything as a single system, can offer guidance, but it's like you feel like you have to move so quick, you're already behind before you get started, right? So, you know, I think us continuing as a group to have these conversations about the tiny successes and what we can learn from one another, even as Lisa was just sharing about things from last month that helped their team, I think that's going to be really helpful to our collective efforts.
And if you're not having uncomfortable conversations, you're not changing systems. So, right? I mean, I kind of got used to back when people thought Pbis was, or it was public broadcasting system, and they would look at me like I had 8 heads. Like, I have no idea what you're talking about, lady. You kind of get used to that, but that's, you know, that's part of the work, getting uncomfortable.
My husband and I just watched Deadwood a little while ago. We'd never seen it. And I think the guys, there's a character named Al, and he says, change isn't here to make friends. And I was like, this is a great quote for my work. Who knew Deadwood would give me so many insights into my work life?
Oh, I love that. I love that. Okay. Yes, when we are uncomfortable, it means we are growing. Okay. Anything else before we kind of jump in? We've got our spotlight stars here, Katie and Kelsey, so we can kind of dive back into the side deck. First, and as I mentioned before, Katie, welcome. We're so grateful that you are spending some time with us this morning, this afternoon, whatever day and whatever time it is. And I'll let you introduce yourself in a second, but you know, just kind of to set the stage, Katie's doing some amazing work with Reach Out to Optum Healthcare. And we just really wanted to highlight that in the context of building a readiness and onboarding platform. And as we're kind of developing our MOU and we're kind of getting the ground under us with bringing in our expanded partners, that as we switch from provider to partner, she's doing some amazing training with the clinicians to kind of get them started before the work gets started. So it's something that I think just an added benefit in the readiness space. And so I'll turn it over to you, Katie, and let me make you a host or a co-host so that you can share, or no, I think Kelly, you're gonna have to do that. If you could make Katie a co-host so she can share her slides, that would be amazing. Thank you. And I'll turn it over to Katie.
Okay. Can you see my screen? And you can hear
Yes,
me. I'm
Katie.
unmuted. That's a good start. Thanks for having me. I'm Katie Azevedo. A lot of this work is due to people in these little Brady boxes. So I met Kelsey, I don't know, a few years ago. And we started having the conversations around what was going on in the state of Idaho. And through her networking, she met Dr. Woody from Optum and connected us. So I want to thank Kelsey for that, and Susan for all of your support. But it's just leveraging others' strengths and colleagues, really. So what I want to share today is this project through Optum Idaho. So Optum is a United Health branch, and they were brought into Idaho about 6 years ago to oversee and manage Medicaid. So honestly, they're quality control. And so they're really in tune with the bulk of our mental health providers and agencies and clinicians in the state of Idaho. And they get it. They get the systems aspect. And so as Dr. Woody from Optum was attending some of the trainings that I was leading, he realized, oh my gosh, we're putting together this mental health in schools toolkit, and we haven't talked about MTSS or PBIS or the ISF at all, and we got to back up. And so I think that that was the launching off point, that not everyone has the opportunity to work with people outside of kind of education that get education, that also get systems. Last spring, when we were naive to what was coming down the pipe as far as a worldwide pandemic, we had our first training. And so I was contracted as the training facilitator to provide regional trainings throughout the state of Idaho to clinicians. And we set it up as a 2-day training. The first day, and it was basically on MTSS and PBIS. And the first day was dedicated to Tier 1. And the second day was dedicated to Tier 2 and Tier 3. And the rationale there was, well, Tier 1's a little bit further away from their comfort zone, and that Tier 2 and especially the Tier 3 is more in their wheelhouse. And so as I was getting ready to present this, I felt a little awkward, honestly. I'm thinking I'm going in and I'm talking about behavior to behavior experts. But what I quickly realized, we started off with just kind of a knowledge check, like PBIS, what do you know? What do you want to know? Fears and reservations, what are you excited about? And most in the room had never heard of PBIS. So that was definitely an eye-opener, and it pushed kind of the why behind the training even more. We were soon shut down, longer than any of us could have imagined. And so the training series that was supposed to be held in 3 different regions in our state, it got shut down after our first one. And then we started rethinking, how are we going to build the capacity of these clinicians to more effectively and efficiently, not just work in the school or work with kids, but to be embedded in the process. And, you know, with COVID pushing us to go virtual, it was a perfect opportunity. So we created a virtual professional learning opportunity. And I'll just kind of go through the different goals. So the short-term goal of this training series was to increase the knowledge base and capacity of school mental health providers in MTSS, PBIS, ISF. That was just kind of our initial thought. This is what, you know, we need to increase the knowledge base. But really our long-term goal is to create an overall framework that integrates mental health providers, school staff, families, and other community partners into a single system of support for students. So that's our big why. In doing this and collaborating back and forth with Optum Idaho, we decided to utilize and leverage some resources that were already in existence. So they use the kind of the website platform of Relias. We decided to focus in on those 3 areas of MTSS, PBIS, and build some virtual learning modules. That's just a fancy term for videos. And so my team built 45 to an hour long video for each of those sections. And that was accompanied with a participant guide. So the whole point of the participant guide is to get that reflection process going. We don't want this just to be information floating out there. We want it to be actionable information. And so once they watched or viewed the video, and we were able to track that, who had viewed what, they completed the participant guide. And then at the end of each month, we followed up with a live virtual learning session, AKA a Zoom meeting, where we are able to come together, to collaborate, to share ideas, to share questions, common questions. And we went through this series. So I have, let's see here. Here are the 3 sections. So the first section, we started simple. We wanted to build that common knowledge and common language that impacted behavior in schools. So a lot of these clinicians are working within schools, but they're working within schools in relation to billable hours. They're not working in schools and seeing the whole climate and culture and the changes and the impact in the day-to-day routines and procedures. So that's where we started. The next section was MTSS and PBIS defined. And we ended up with interconnecting school mental health and PBIS. So that's where we really talked about the ISF. And I mentioned this already. So our content delivery and participation virtual learning modules, and I'll show you some clips from some of those. So, 45-minute to an hour video, and then they had that participant guide to guide that reflection. And then we followed up with a virtual learning session. We also offered certificates of completion, so they could start collecting some CEUs along the process. And I set it up through a local university, so if they would like a graduate credit, they could also do that. So one part of this, or portion, that was missing in the beginning, I believe, was the marketing aspect. So simply sending out or including it in an already established monthly newsletter really didn't get the people to the table that we needed. So really thinking about, what do they need? What are some motivators? So I'll show you just a first clip. So we really talked about the positive outcomes of looking at a comprehensive system.
Many positive outcomes have been evidenced in the status of children and adolescents who have participated in a comprehensive school mental health system. So a few of those outcomes are listed here. When we have children who are receiving mental health support within school systems, we are finding better academic outcomes, access to care, early identification and intervention, positive school climate and safety. We're seeing youth, family, educator, and peer engagement, and a continuum of services. We're also finding better psychosocial outcomes.
So the messaging portion, the delivery, has been incredibly important. We're looking for those sound bites that they can wrap their head around. We're looking for, I always tell those that I work with, let's figure out, if we were to stand on our soapbox outside the grocery store, how would we explain this? So how do we kind of overcome some of these acronyms and language that we're so immersed in? With these videos, we want them to understand what it is we're talking about, and not just understand it, but able to explain it to other people. So we talk a lot about, if someone was to approach you and ask you what is Pbis, what's your elevator speech? And I remind them, we're in Idaho. Our elevators don't go very high. I mean, we don't have very many skyscrapers around here. So what can you say that's short and sweet? And I think that really helps build the knowledge base of the clinicians, because they're really having to, tackle what does this mean and what does it mean to me? So for these three sections, now I mentioned this already. So the first one, the impact of behavior, and you can kind of see how we went through these. So they had a few weeks to access the video, complete that participant guide. We contacted them with a registration link, and then they attended the live virtual learning session. And then for section 2, MTSS and Pbis defined. And then section 3 was really all about ISF. So I just have one follow-up video on ISF, and this is a kind of a chunk that we pulled from the third virtual learning module. And you can see here how they could either receive CEUs or register for that university course. So here is 4 elements of ISF.
Current rates of mental illness and substance abuse are alarming and require societal shifts. Mental health prevention is now recognized as a crucial part of education, but schools struggle with how to establish a comprehensive system of mental health support. What we need is an interconnected system that leverages all of the available resources. This brings us to the Interconnected Systems Framework, or ISF. ISF systematically joins together the practices of Pbis and school mental health into a single system of support. Rather than doing one more thing or adding on something new, the ISF utilizes the already established framework of MTSS and Pbis and expands and enhances that framework to include school mental health supports. Using an interconnected systems framework allows schools to identify students with mental health needs earlier, link students to evidence-based interventions, use data to ensure students receiving support improve, expand the role for clinicians to support school personnel and students at every tier, and create healthier school environments. There are 4 foundational elements of the interconnected system framework. A single system of delivery is one in which education and mental health systems are integrated across tiers of support, with multidisciplinary teams using data to implement one continuum of evidence-based practices. Within a mental health for all approach, student social, emotional, and behavioral health is addressed with the same level of attention and concern as cognitive development and academic achievement. This results in social, emotional, behavioral skills being taught by all staff across all settings with all students and embedded in all curricula. Historically, school mental health programs have focused on counting the number of students referred to mental health providers, considering the number of students receiving a service as a measure of effectiveness. With the ISF, success is measured by tracking the fidelity of implementation and by monitoring the positive outcomes for students and their families. MTSS is essential to install school mental health supports. The ISF uses the features of MTSS as successfully applied through Pbis implementation over the past 2 decades. These features include a leadership team comprised of all stakeholders, a continuum of evidence-based interventions linked across all tiers, a formal process for selecting and implementing evidence-based practices. This interconnected system framework helps educators and clinicians to work smarter, not harder. It provides a structure to house our evidence-based practices.
So again, that came in section 3. But if we would have jumped right in with the interconnected systems framework, most of our participants would have no background knowledge as to what that meant. So we really started with that common language of behavior in schools to MTSS to Pbis to the ISF. And the beauty of this is they were able to, so this is a snippet from from the 3rd virtual learning module, and then we're able to come together virtually, of course, through a virtual learning session and talk about it. So what does this look like within your school? What's lacking? What could we beef up? So next steps. I mentioned market virtual training. So a lot of times I think we get so immersed in our content and we're so excited about it that we forget other people may not be as excited about it. So we're really thinking about how can we not just train individuals, but incentivize this training. And so currently they're looking at the fee schedule and maybe adding some stipends for those who have gone through this training with that endorsement or that certificate of completion. We're also looking at providing on-site technical assistance. So for those clinicians who are in schools who did go through the 3 sections of the training, let's go to where they're at and have some of those discussions. And let's invite the principal or the admin team or the leadership team. So that's in the future. And we'll also be picking up, it's funny that we're going to pick up where we left off in the beginning with those in-person regional trainings where we're doing tier 1 is day 1 and tier 2 and tier 3 is day 2. And then we're also looking at creating some training videos for parents and community members, how to advocate for your kid and access school mental health supports within your school. We had that conversation earlier this week, and a member of the team said, well, we have this great manual. Well, it's 425 pages. What parent is going to pick that up when they are in crisis and need some support? So how can we deliver this information so it's engaging, so it's fun, and people want to listen to it?
Thank you.
Yeah, there's my contact information. I'm always an email away, so.
Thank you, Katie. That was amazing. I love that that you're using this as the platform for the onboarding process, and we're not just kind of jumping in and saying, oh, here's the MOU and now here's what you're going to be doing, and then here's your assignment, go. It's a slow process that's really grown and nurtured with the foundational elements, so they know what kind of they're signing up for, and they know kind of the basis by which we're asking them to operate and function. So I love the detail of the orientation and the fact that they can get credits along the way is really important. And the videos are amazing. They're polished, they're professional, the scripts are beautiful. So congratulations, and thank you so much for sharing. I'd love to open it up for discussion. Anybody have questions for Katie or want to chime in about something that they're noticed or wondering? We can stop sharing screen if you want so we can see each other. Thank you.
So as usual, I have a question. Katie, what's the reaction been from the behavioral health folks who have viewed the videos and done things? Like, do you have any way to gauge that yet, or is it just rolling out?
Yes, and there's really two sides to it. One area where we definitely need to improve is getting more traction. So we had a small group of clinicians participate. One positive indicator is they went through the whole thing and they were engaged, and they all submitted their participant guides. They're all wanting that certificate of completion, but not just that, they were engaged within the live virtual session. So they were thankful. They said, you know, this will help me so much, because at times I hear of this term Pbis, but I didn't really know what it was, and I didn't really feel comfortable asking. So that is good, but we need to figure out how to market it. And again, it's free. It's not that we're selling idea, and we're selling the fact that we want to grow people's capacity, but we're not actually asking for any dollars. But we also know that time is money. And so what is the incentive to participate? I just love the fact that Optum Idaho has bought into this, because there are very few, if any, models that I see where we're training clinicians to more effectively work in schools.
How were you accessing the participants? Like, were they already working with a particular school district? Was it just sort of a motley assortment from across the state, or how are they even connected, I guess, with Optimum? Don't understand how pieces fit together.
So they are Optum providers, meaning that they're able to bill to Medicaid. And so they knew who their clinicians were. And we reached out. We had kind of a meet and greet. We did the newsletter, the emails. We did a Facebook ad, some different things like that. But definitely, I think the best marketing is word of mouth. And so I just push the fact that we have to create something of quality and something that's useful, and get a group started, and they're going to share with their friends. And then we can kind of get that kind of amoeba growing and moving in the right direction.
Thanks.
Do you have any way to gauge, were most of them independent providers, private practice folks, or were they affiliated? Like, I don't know Idaho's mental health system, so I don't know if you have a state system of public mental, I assume you have something, but do you have any way of knowing which area they were from? Not geographic.
Geographic or not geographic? Not geographic.
Not in terms of private, public, and that kind of thing. Yeah.
What we found is some clusters, just like we do in schools, some clusters of excellence. And for those agencies that were invested in the professional development of their clinicians and also invested in doing work in schools, that's really where we got traction. Since that point, and we have weekly meetings on this, and it's super exciting, but Optum was able to pull their data, their billable hours data, and look at who's billing within schools. And we identified 20 agencies who will target and say, hey, we've got this great opportunity for you, which makes a lot of sense. So let's start with that, with those that have that high level of readiness.
And one last thing, and then I'll shut up. Have you considered either targeting leaders? So I know that you said, like, one of the things that you felt was unique was that this was targeting actual clinicians. And we're finding that we have to have leadership on board, especially around the release for time to even engage in the training, let alone, engage with tier 1 level kinds of things. So I guess my question is, are you thinking that you would actively target those folks using this, or create something separate for them that talks about their role in supporting this work?
When we think leaders, you know, there's our agency leaders, there's also our state education leaders, our LEA leaders, and we're really trying to weave this together. So Idaho was awarded an AWARE grant, and we have placed many of the, if we want to call them school mental health leaders, as advisory board members on the grant. So they're seeing what are the schools going through. We've also, with our AWARE grant, we have placed a clinician within each LEA. We're focusing on rural and remote schools because we're mostly rural and remote, and that's where we're lacking services. But embedding that clinician, we're able to, with the grant funds, provide payment beyond the billable hours. So they're there to participate on the leadership team. They're able to go to the trainings with the team, all of those things that really immerse you within the school. And we're talking with the agencies, how can we sustain this after 5 years? So that's kind of the next conversation, because it comes down to dollars.
And the return on investment, and really being able to see that too, and that kind of is a nice segue into Lucille's question about, she's asking how do you know it's successful? Are you progress monitoring impact or having follow-up with the participants?
We're not there yet, but it's definitely on our radar. We just wrapped up the first cycle, so.
Awesome.
Is Optum willing to track the clinicians who participate to see if there's any change in their school-based billing post-participation?
Yes, and it's nice because that system for tracking is already there. So we're not trying to build it ad hoc.
Again, I just love the thoughtfulness behind making sure that the clinicians who aren't familiar with school spaces have kind of an advanced preview of what's going on in schools and how ways that they can be helpful and connect to that prior to us asking them to change the MOU and assume that they have all this background knowledge. So I think it's something to kind of elevate in terms of some of the readiness activities that we're doing. Any other questions? Well, Katie, I'm so thankful for you joining us today and sharing that, all the videos and all the work behind it. They're so polished and professional and beautiful. There are questions around sharing those videos or if they're accessible to other states.
So that gets a little tricky. Optum owns the videos. So we can look at that. I know that through the AWARE grant, we're also building an Idaho school mental health portal. So what we're finding is silos, obviously, they're everywhere. And so, this group's working on resilience, this group's working on trauma-sensitive approaches. We're trying to bring it all together. And so Optum has brought up the idea of housing those videos kind of once we get through the cycles on that portal, and then there'll be free access for everyone.
Well, maybe, Katie, before that happens would be the time to install some sort of way to know what the impact is so that you don't go too far. Like if this is considered your pilot, you could maybe push people a little bit to decide on what is it we hope to gain from this? How do we know? And try to see how you could zero in before you expand, because it might change how you do it.
Okay, that's a great idea.
Awesome. Again, I can't thank you enough for your time. I know it looks like you got back to your office, so I thought.
I was supposed to be at a school, and things happen, so that meeting happened virtually.
Oh, good. I'm glad you weren't running around trying to find a spot in the school. And again, totally appreciate your joining us. So any other questions before we turn it over to our next spotlight? All right, Kelsey in the house. We're on our, fourth or fifth call of the day together.
least, it seems like at this point. All right, I want to make sure I can share sound.
Did we make you co-host? Okay, good.
Okay.
Thanks, Kelly.
All right, so quick tech check. You're seeing my slide there, a mindful state. So that's what I'm here to talk about. And I'm just really excited to share this new development in Washington, which is really a wellness campaign, a statewide wellness campaign. And, you know, something different about this campaign, I've learned so much in this process, is it's a people-powered community. So instead of folks saying, these are the things we think everybody should focus on or are important, it began before we had a logo, before we had the anthem, A Mindful State, with talking to people, and then has evolved from there. So it started through our Washington State Governor's Safe Start Advisory Committee. Basically, there were these, or are these, three committees. One that's kind of focusing on vaccines, one that focuses on the economic recovery, and then one that focuses on social support. So the Social Supports Task Force is where this campaign came from, and is funded through a grant from the CARES Act, and really is representative of this collaboration between our Department of Health, civic leaders across the state, nonprofit organizations, healthcare providers, other leading experts in mental health, and most importantly, people who have been willing to go on camera and share their lived experience. So it is targeted to people in Washington State, with a particular emphasis on youth and those communities who are the most vulnerable to mental and behavioral health consequences of COVID-19 due to poverty and systemic racism and disenfranchisement. And I think, you know, as I was brought into this work, what we know about, so I think Susan shared before, the work around the behavioral health forecasting that's coming out of Washington State. And from that work, just the expectation that out of our population of 7 million, 3 million individuals are going to experience significant behavioral health symptoms. And so part of this campaign was, how do we engage the other 4 million folks to support each other? So it's really focused on destigmatizing, how to encourage engagement in wellness activities, providing connections to resources, and this idea around prevention and helping to prevent new cases, providing some really excellent and user-friendly resources with the goal to create a more resilient and healthy population. So here's how it's going. We just actually had this report Wednesday at our team meeting. There are now 250 billboards and posters around the state, some heavily concentrated in Tacoma and Seattle, many translated into Spanish. They have gone on our sounder trains, on buses moving up and down and through communities. We have a social media strategy. Radio and TV press is supposed to be starting today. What I'm here to talk, really focus on, is this event that we held and elevated, Youth Voice Connections We Need event, and then some follow-up that's going to happen as a part of that. But what I have here, I just grabbed a few things from the website, but each of those pictures of individuals you can click on the website, and these are just folks just telling their story about how they've been impacted and how they've been coping. And then the way the website is set up is you listen to somebody share their story, And then on that same page are resources. So if that is something you've experienced as well, you have then those links to resources as well as experts. So it is a powerful, it includes a powerful marketing campaign with the website, with social media. And as I mentioned before, there's a real focus on youth. And so one of our kickoff activities, oh, just real quick, these are just some of the folks that are involved. And the idea is we're continually gaining pledges and organizations to join this effort, to agree to be interviewed or to post on social media or share social media, connecting their organization to these efforts. So the event that we had in April was this Connections We Need event. And the idea was to engage school staff and after school staff and really let the youth tell us what they have experienced, what this has been like for them, and what they need from the adults. So I can put the link in the chat. I'm sure they're sharing the PowerPoint as well to where you can find the recording and the materials. But if we've got a few moments, I'll show you a few clips. So these were the 4 amazing students that really opened up and shared with us the challenges that they've experienced. So I pulled out a few quotes. Really in their presentation, we were able to identify some themes around equity and access, that they need safe spaces to have conversations about the things they're experiencing, that they need skills to provide peer supports. Sorse, who we may not be able to hear from today, but her presentation was very powerful. She felt very overwhelmed by the needs that her peers had, and unprepared to support them. And it was really sad to her that she couldn't provide them the support that she felt like they needed. And then again, just reiterating that grown-ups need to create space to listen to youth. So let me pull this over and go a little bit of the video. And I'm just pulling out just a couple minutes from each one to give you an idea of the types of things that they shared with us.
Get the Kleenex ready.
Yeah. Okay, let's see if this is.
My year, they're lost. A lot of them are lost because a lot of these programs we have that are for seniors that are colleges limit, set a cap at the students. So I know a lot of them aren't able to join these programs. So I think they're pretty stuck because they're not getting that necessary help. But it would be great for them to have somebody there to talk to them, to discuss them, and let them know that they have a plan that they could set up for their futures too. I think that I'm ready for my future. I'm set up. I got all the support I needed. But things additionally outside of that, I know that something that helped me a lot was during the school year, there were a lot of events that happened that we saw on the news that were really impactful. I was given the opportunity to, during my classes, discuss those things that were happening, like in January, some events that were happening, having a safe space for that. I know that really helped me out. Being able to set aside, the normal curriculum and be able to have a space to talk and discuss about the events that were happening around us really helped to open up that space. And that was during the class time. I know early January we had the opportunity to do those things. And I think that really let us take a breath, and set aside the school and really talk about what was happening around us. Because besides school, there's the virus and all these things we're seeing on social media, on the news. And honestly, it's really nice to talk about it, to vent, to release that pressure. So I think that's something huge that really helps.
All right, so that was Brian. That was our senior talking about the need to create spaces. And then let's see, we're going to hear from Hope next. Is that right?
Cedar High School, and COVID was an experience for me. As a person of color and just living in Mason County in general, with COVID on top, it was a lot. Like growing up here, I experienced racism at a very young age, just from being called names and stuff in Mason County. Like, it was hard because the major population here is white, so it was weird being, like, in my family, I was taught no one is different from each other, we all love each other. And I was so used to that until I was exposed to being called the N-word and other just nasty slurs at school. And I knew at some point, if teachers weren't going to help me, I was going to have my voice heard, like whether it was by a teacher or it was by myself. And just this year with COVID going on, it was a lot, because at the beginning of COVID, it was really tough maneuvering around what we were all gonna do. And I was really lost at first, and I was struggling with my mental health a lot. Around a year ago, at the beginning of COVID, I tried to commit, and it was really hard for me and my family, especially with COVID, because not everyone was able to access the resources that they were once able to. But she was good with putting me in therapy, so I was getting the help I needed. And then differences happened with me and my therapist, so I no longer went. And throughout COVID, it was just thing after another. And I think it was a few months later, after I was already dealing with a bunch of mental health stuff, October rolled around, and I found out, after trying to get into contact with my dad, I found out he passed away due to COVID. And since then, I realized that people were taking a pandemic as a joke, and I knew that if I wasn't going to communicate towards my friends and the people I surround myself with that it's a serious thing that they should be taking seriously, then I can't have them in my life.
So these stories were hard. They were hard to hear. And it was just impressive that these youth were able to share what had happened to them, and incredibly important for the adults to listen. So I'm going to share just one last clip.
Of my peers. We're really the generation that represents the change makers, the innovators, people who really think outside the box. And we will be taking over from our parents to bring about effective change, such as equality for all, climate action, innovations in science and technology. However, due to this experience that we're all going through right now, we're also the generation that can be called the quarantine generation, the generation that experienced lockdown amidst the pandemic of the century, a contagion that put everything on a standstill, like even our social interactions, school activities, sports. And the collateral damage of this pandemic is the great toll that it has taken on us teens. So I have always been passionate about community health, outreach, and grassroots work. I've been helping organize health camps and have initiated several health campaigns in the community. I was spurred to action in February 2020 when the lockdown started, when our world turned upside down. I really wanted to do something for my peers who were struggling and having a hard time coming to terms with all the change that was taking over our lives. I started my magazine Youth Aware, which is a platform for the youth to share their ideas, their views on things that are important to them, to know about the world and things that affect them. It quickly drew an audience around the world, and we have not only readers, but also writers around the world. And I use this platform to interview community leaders, scientists, doctors, firefighters, just people who inspire the youth during this time so that young people can really hear from them, learn from them, and be motivated to keep on going, even though we're in this difficult time right now?
So these youth were incredible. Meher, who you just heard from, she is in the 8th grade, and she just wows me. She has this amazing platform, this magazine. Like she said, she's interviewing folks. She's also started youth cafes with a community mental health partner. So these virtual youth cafes that she's been doing with teens. Oh,
no, we don't. You don't care.
I think somebody needs to go on mute. Okay, there we go. So anyway, just a powerful event that is helping to shape some professional development opportunities that we're going to offer through this project, and some additional events. And so these were things that we heard from folks that participated. So we are doing some session evaluations. So hearing that the training will impact their work by advocating strongly for the inclusion of student voice in program development and evaluation. Today's event spurs me on to have important conversations to create community bridges for better communications. This person will share the recording with staff so they can hear from the young people and experience what a full supportive interaction and embracing social emotional well-being looks like. And then finally, that it was helpful to hear from the students what their concerns are.
Awesome, Kelsey. You know, I think we talk a lot about destigmatizing mental health. We talk a lot about youth voice, but I love and marketing campaign and how important all those things are in kind of this coordination of care effort. And so I really appreciate you sharing those powerful stories from the youth. I think one of the things that worries me is as we go back into the way forward, we're going to kind of fall back into old routines. And I really think that having the youth be front and center and telling us what they're experiencing keeps mental health and wellness at the forefront of what we do inside our education units. So, and I think I was so struck when I listened to that session that they all kind of said the same thing. You know, they all said, we need spaces to process what happened. And I love, he said, you know, we put the curriculum aside and we made time to engage in a process where we shared and talked it out and how important that was. And again, keeping that in the forefront forever, you know, is going to, and sustaining that. So really kind of creating that space. And then the other thing that kind of came through for me and all 4 kids said was their incredible worry, not only for themselves, but for their peers who didn't have some of the resources that they felt privileged to have, and how worried they were about their friends. And so again, you know, the extent we can create a marketing campaign that we can put youth and community engagement at the forefront, I think is so incredibly important. Thank you so much for sharing, Kelsey, and thank you for all the work that you've done on this, and you too, Katie. It's amazing. So we'll open it up for discussion and questions for Kelsey.
Can you do that for us in Delaware?
Well, I think what's really powerful about this is so many people are collaborating. It really does, you know, it really does take sort of the full spectrum of, you know, our Department of Health, education, civic leaders, nonprofit organizations to move this, you know, to move this statewide. And I think that's what's been really impressive about this whole project is how quickly folks have formed, how committed they were to making it people powered and let the community kind of shape the campaign. Like I said, none of this was we were calling it the Washington Wellness Campaign just because we felt like we needed to call it something. And as a result of the interviews and what we're hearing from people, this idea around a mindful state kind of developed.
Do you have any thoughts about how to measure changes in perception? Because one of the things that we're thinking about with sort of our anti-stigma tools and in our evaluation, it's very hard to measure that perception change. And I could almost see some of the young people helping, you know, like a little mini action research project to develop some ideas about, well, how do we see how this changes the perception of young people and adults about stigma and mental illness and mental wellness on that continuum?
Yeah, I think those are questions that we're asking ourselves as this campaign, you know, has evolved. You know, right now, the things that they're looking at aren't, I think, going to tell us some of those answers to those questions. Things like website hits and social media engagements, you know, all of those things that are important that tell us that, you know, people are accessing the information, but in what ways has it impacted or changed?
I mean, I wonder if you could, in after a period of time when you know it has really been out there for a while, and I'm saying this from my perspective of, I think that there are lots of places, and this was beautifully done, and I think it's an amazing job that you're doing. And I know that this is being talked about a lot. And so I'm always astonished when I'm with educators where we've talked about this and people have been nodding and saying, oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. And then in the next meeting or the next sentence, somebody's talking about how much content they have to make up from the lost year. And like, it's like it all goes out the window. So I wonder if you could somehow do a retrospective, like how much have you prioritized X, Y, or Z, or changed how you're doing things, or, you know, adapted your curriculum or something like that. We can't really get the baseline because it's not the true baseline at this point, but we could do a retrospective look if we could figure out the right questions, and maybe even just talking about asking the questions would make people realize that they hold the power to actually create something that's a little bit different. Somehow it's not connecting, or at least I'm not seeing it.
Yeah, we're always in these meetings where like, oh, we're gonna, you know, do this mindful moment, and, you know, we're gonna check in with each other, and then the rest of the agenda is, oh, here are 72 things to add to your plate. There's no time, you know. It's like it's completely disjointed, and so I think you're right. You know, we have to be able, when we put these marketing campaigns in, when we put these training campaigns in, to always be thinking about how is this going to move the needle in terms of data points? What are the data points that we're going to be using throughout this process to gauge increase in content, decrease in stigma? Then how does that translate into behavior change that actually supports kids at the end of the day to get better outcomes?
You know, I was thinking, Susan, when Kelsey mentioned about like website hits and reach and that kind of thing. I've been in a lot of meetings recently where we've been really mindful of, from the State Department, we're putting tons of guidance out, like way more even, I think, right now because of the COVID piece. And how much can a district consume, right? Mm-hmm. And so within our MyMTSS communications plan this year, that's a piece that we're trying to get better at, is looking at both our website analytics in terms of what documents are being hit on, and looking at open rates of emails that we're sending out, and really looking at like what kind of reach are we getting, what kind of bang for our buck are we getting through the communication strategies. You know, and even just having conversations like, so our MyMTSS, MDE's MyMTSS website, well, I click on our practice profile all the time because it's right, you know, and they're like, but we can filter you out because we can look at unique users, right? I'm like, that's good. You know, so, I mean, there is power behind, if you have staff that know how to look at the website analytics and, you know, and start And we've already started to make some like changes to our MTSS website based on some of those trends of how we're organizing information and what people are looking for. So just food for thought of, and we're connecting that, the data, but that's part of our communication planning piece in our comms committee.
Well, I think it's the, the proximal outcomes and the distal outcomes, right? The, what are we expecting to happen short term? And then as a result of changing, and again, I'm not talking about changing mindset necessarily, but just opening the door to start to have the conversations and then asking people who have not yet been comfortable in the mental health space to take a step towards greeting students by name, starting to strengthen relationships, starting to have a mindful moment in their classroom or a calming strategy right before a test, right? Just kind of stepping in and leading into those changes of behavior that then end up resulting in a more positive climate. And, when we're engaging our students, being able for them to reflect out how they're seeing the environment change over time. I think the bottom line is no matter what we're trying to do and install, it's going to be really important to define what the metrics are that let us know we're heading in the right direction and we're ending up with outcomes, not just people feel better, right? They're actually changing their lives. And we've got documented proof so that when funding starts to get pulled or we're falling back into old patterns of doing business, we can put this up and say, you know what, this makes an impact. And it makes an impact not only in wellness, but in academic outcomes, which are Kimberly would say is the currency of education. So I also think we get ourselves really overwhelmed. So I want to take us back to the phases of crisis recovery. In the fall, one of the briefs that Steve Goodman, who's on the call now, put forward and led us in was talking about what to kind of focus in on in the fall. And there's two focus areas, right? It's staff wellness and stabilizing the learning environment. And if we can hold steady on those, and thank you, Kimberly, for offering that staff need those spaces too. And if we can create those spaces for staff and get them comfortable with dialoguing and talking about their recovery process, they're going to be much more inclined to do that in the space with the children that they're serving in their classrooms. And so again, if we can create a laser focus and really say, we're in initial phase of recovery and here are the two areas we're going to lean into and work on and build from there, I think that will go a long way. And Steve, I don't know if you want to say more or are able to say more about that phases of recovery brief. Any others? Anything else? Thank you, Kelsey. I know you had to go. We're doing another ISF Northwest demo site meeting after this call. So I'll just share my screen really quickly and let you all know that, let me move this around. We did our spotlight, we did our discussion. Thank you so much. We will get these slides to you. After Kelsey talks about the wellness campaign, I also wanted to make sure you all knew that we have a Pbis wellness campaign going on, and we are really trying to give very specific tips and strategies to use. So this could be replicated in the start of the school year to kind of, again, make it doable, make it feasible, but just wanted to highlight that this campaign is going on with the center and it's hashtag School Wellness Pbis, and here are some examples. And then Brandy Simonson and I just did a podcast through the Teach by Design that's led by Megan Cade through the Pbis apps. And they've got some archives to consider looking through. But again, just again, highlighting how important the marketing and campaigning piece of this is to this work as we kind of lean in and talk about mental health with folks who haven't been as comfortable in the space as we are. And then before we go, just making sure you get these dates on your calendar. Please let us know what you need. Please, if there's things that you need during the summertime, continue to email us, ask us for resources, ask us for things. I know that most of us are going to try to take some time off in July, but I'm always looking at email. So that's probably not a good wellness strategy, but I will be looking at email throughout the time that I'm off just to make sure that we can, we're continuing to help and support you, even though we're not formally in these PLCs. So make sure you put those dates on your calendar. That is all I have. I know we're 1 minute past the hour. Thank you for everything this year. It has been phenomenal to get to know you, even in the virtual landscape. I feel like we've deepened our connection and relationship. I am grateful to each and every one of you. Thank you so much for everything you do. We can't wait to see you next year, and we can't wait to hear about all the wonderful outcomes.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time. Take care.